Can someone move her away from the main table? I don't want my guests thinking this is some kind of charity event. My sister's voice cut through the room, loud enough for everyone to hear. Forks stopped. Heads turned. And then she smiled at me like it was a joke. I stood there, holding the menu I designed for her wedding. What she didn't know is that I wasn't just the designer. My name is Melinda Mullins. I'm 34 years old, and I've spent most of my life being the one people overlook. Not in a dramatic, movie-worthy way. In the quiet, everyday way where people just forget you're in the room. Where your name gets left off the group text. Where your parents talk about your sister's promotion at dinner, but never ask how your week went. That kind of invisible. The kind that settles into your bones until you almost start believing it yourself. I work as a freelance event planner and culinary consultant. I built my entire career from scratch, and I mean from the ground up, after I dropped out of college during my second year. Money ran out. My parents told me they couldn't help. They said they'd already committed their savings toward my sister Emily's future. Emily was always the one. She had the perfect grades, the perfect boyfriend, the perfect trajectory. She went to a top university, got a corporate marketing job straight out of school, and had the kind of life our parents could brag about at church. I was the other daughter. The one they described with a sigh. Melinda is still figuring things out. That was their favorite line. They said it when I started my first catering gig out of a rented kitchen. They said it when I launched my consulting business. They said it when I landed my first 5-figure contract with a luxury resort. Didn't matter what I achieved. To them, I was unstable. Always trying something new. Never settling down. Never doing things the right way. But here's the thing about building something quietly. Nobody watches you do it, so nobody sees how strong the foundation really is. Over the years, I developed a small but powerful high-end catering consultancy. I partnered with some of the best chefs and event firms in the region. My clients included private clubs, destination wedding planners, and corporate retreat organizers who needed someone who understood food, timing, logistics, and elegance all at once. I wasn't rich or glamorous. I didn't post about my work on social media. I didn't have a flashy office or a personal brand with a logo on everything. But I had something they didn't expect. I had connections, contracts, and a reputation in elite catering circles that could make or break an event. The industry knew my name. My family didn't bother learning what I did. To them, I was still just Melinda. Still figuring things out. Still the one you didn't quite take seriously. And honestly, for a long time, I let that narrative sit. I didn't fight it. I didn't correct it. I just kept working. But there comes a moment when silence stops being patience and starts becoming permission. Permission for people to treat you like you're less than what you are. That moment came at my sister's wedding. If you've ever felt like the overlooked one in your family, the one people assume can't succeed, hit that subscribe button. I know what it's like to be judged before anyone sees what you've built. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by the people closest to you? And if you believe quiet success is still success, give this video a like and click share. Let's remind people we don't need validation to win. Emily got engaged in January. The wedding was set for late June. I found out about the engagement through a Facebook post. Not a phone call. Not a text. A Facebook post with a photo of the ring and a caption that read, "She said yes," with about 40 heart emojis. I liked the post and sent her a congratulations message. She replied 2 days later with a thumbs up emoji. That set the tone for everything that followed. For months, I heard about the wedding through my mother. The venue was gorgeous. The flowers were imported. The guest list was 200 people. Emily had hired a top-tier wedding planner, a photographer from out of state, and a caterer that specialized in French Mediterranean fusion. I wasn't involved. I wasn't asked. I wasn't even on the early guest list. Then, about 5 weeks before the wedding, I got a phone call. Not from Emily. From my mother. "Melinda, your sister needs a little help. The caterer she hired just pulled out. Something about a scheduling conflict. She's in a real bind." I asked what kind of help she meant. My mother hesitated. "Well, you know people in that world, don't you? Maybe you could make a few calls. Help her find a replacement." I wanted to say no. I almost did. But the thing about being the overlooked one is that when they finally do ask for your help, it feels like a door opening. You tell yourself maybe this time they'll see you. Maybe this time it'll be different. So I said yes. I made calls. I pulled strings. I reached out to one of the best catering firms I'd worked with, a company called Vellier Dining, and convinced them to take on a last-minute wedding for 200 guests. It wasn't easy. It required negotiation, contract adjustments, and a personal guarantee from me as a consulting intermediary. I spent 3 full days restructuring vendor logistics, coordinating timelines, and ensuring the menu matched Emily's vision. I did all of this without being thanked, without being credited, and without being formally invited to anything beyond the ceremony itself. The rehearsal dinner invitation came 4 days before the event. It was a text message from Emily that read, "Mom says you should come Thursday night. Starts at 7. That was it. No warmth. No excitement. Just an instruction passed through our mother and delivered like a calendar reminder. I showed up Thursday evening at the venue, a converted estate with stone walls and string lights woven through the trees. I wore a simple navy dress. I carried a leather portfolio with the final menu layout I'd designed for the caterer, printed on thick cardstock with gold lettering. I was proud of it. It was beautiful work. When I walked in, Emily was standing near the head table with a group of her friends, laughing about something on her phone. She saw me and waved me over. I smiled. I thought maybe she'd introduce me properly. She did introduce me. Just not the way I expected. "Everyone, this is my sister Melinda," she said, gesturing loosely in my direction. "She's still figuring things out." The group laughed politely. One woman tilted her head with a pitying smile. I opened my mouth to say something, but Emily had already turned back to her friends. Later, during the seated portion of the dinner, I heard it. The line that still echoes in my head. "Can someone move her away from the main table? I don't want my guests thinking this is some kind of charity event." She said it to one of the bridesmaids, but she didn't whisper. She never whispered. She wanted people to hear. She wanted me to hear. I looked at my parents. My father stared at his plate. My mother adjusted her napkin. Neither of them said a word. Near the end of the night, Emily walked past me on her way to the restroom. She stopped just long enough to say, "At least this time you're not asking us for money." I looked at her. I held her gaze. And I said, very calmly, "No. Not this time." The days between the rehearsal dinner and the wedding were supposed to be filled with excitement. Family coming together. Last-minute preparations. Shared laughter and nervous tears. For me, they were filled with phone calls to vendors, schedule confirmations, delivery logistics, and silent humiliation. The morning after the rehearsal dinner, Emily held a bridal brunch at a cafe downtown. I wasn't originally included, but my mother called and said I should come to keep the peace. I arrived to find Emily already seated at the center of a long table surrounded by 12 women, most of whom I didn't know. When I sat down at the far end, no one acknowledged me. Halfway through the brunch, the conversation turned to careers. One of the bridesmaids asked Emily how she'd managed to pull off such an incredible wedding while working full-time. Emily smiled and said, "Honestly, I just have a knack for it. I handled most of the planning myself. The coordination, the vendors, the design. It's been exhausting, but I wanted it to feel personal." I nearly choked on my coffee. She had done almost none of it. I had reorganized her entire vendor pipeline in less than a week. I had personally negotiated pricing with Vellier Dining. I had designed the seating charts, the menu cards, the timeline documents. And she sat there, soaking in praise for work she didn't do. Then it got worse. Another woman at the table asked Emily what I did for a living. Emily glanced at me with a half smile and said, "Oh, Melinda does gigs. You know, freelance stuff. Not a real job, but she keeps busy." The table laughed. A few women exchanged knowing glances. I sat perfectly still. My face didn't change. But inside, something cracked. Not broke. Cracked. Like a wall that had been holding back water for too long and finally started letting it seep through. After the brunch, Emily pulled me aside and said she needed a favor. "The florist is adding an extra arrangement for the reception entrance. Can you just cover it for now? I'll pay you back after the honeymoon. The cost was $1,400. I looked at her and asked if she was serious. It's not a big deal, Melinda. Your family. I'd do the same for you. No, she wouldn't. She never had. But I paid for the flowers. And then I paid for the additional linens she said were last minute. And then the extra glassware rental she forgot to budget for. Each time, she promised to pay me back. Each time, I noticed something small but important. The contracts being signed weren't in her name. They were in mine. Not because she was being generous. Because when the original caterer dropped out and I stepped in, all the replacement vendor agreements were processed through my business. Melinda Mullins Consulting was the legal entity on every invoice, every service agreement, every delivery receipt. Emily didn't notice. She didn't care about the paperwork. She only cared about the presentation. But I noticed. And as the days went on, I stopped reacting to her comments. I stopped flinching at the jokes. I stopped looking at my parents for support that was never going to come. Instead, I started watching, listening, documenting. I saved every text message, every email approval, every receipt and signed form. I screenshot conversations where Emily confirmed services and told me to just handle it. I kept a folder on my laptop titled Wedding File. Inside were 47 documents that told a very different story than the one Emily was performing for her guests. I wasn't planning revenge. Not exactly. But I was done being invisible. And I was absolutely done being unpaid. What they didn't know is that I never worked for free. I don't mean that as some dramatic declaration. I mean it literally. My business model was built on contracts. Every job I took, whether it was a consultation for a private dinner or full-service coordination for a 200-person event, went through a documented agreement. Rates, deliverables, timelines, payment terms. That's how professionals operate. When Emily's caterer dropped out 5 weeks before her wedding, I didn't just make a few calls like some helpful sister pitching in from the sidelines. I activated my entire professional network. I contacted Value Dining directly. I negotiated a custom package. I structured the service agreement, oversaw the logistics, and built the operational framework from scratch. All of this was done through my consultancy. My tax ID was on the contract. My signature was on the vendor coordination forms. My business insurance covered the liability. Emily thought she was getting family help. What she was actually getting was a full-service consulting engagement worth tens of thousands of dollars. And I let her believe it was free. I let her believe I was just helping out because, at first, I thought she'd acknowledge it eventually. I thought at some point she'd turn to me and say, "Thank you, Melinda. I couldn't have done this without you." That moment never came. Instead, she called me a charity case. She told her friends I didn't have a real job. She made me pay out of pocket for things she forgot to budget. And she took credit for every single detail I built. So I made a decision. If she wanted to treat me like a vendor, I'd bill her like one. I sat down at my desk 2 nights before the wedding and opened my invoicing software. Line by line, I entered every service I had provided. Consultation fees, vendor coordination, menu design, contract negotiation, logistics management, staff briefings, emergency vendor replacement surcharge, travel and communication costs, subtotal after subtotal. I watched the number climb. I didn't inflate anything. I didn't add spite charges. Every line item reflected my standard professional rates, the same rates I charged my corporate clients. I had a plan they never saw coming. The total came to $89,000. I stared at that number for a long time. I printed the invoice. I placed it in a manila envelope. And I sealed it with steady hands. I wasn't going to hand it to Emily myself. That wasn't the point. The point was the truth. The truth that I had done the work. That I had earned the respect. And that no one in my family had bothered to see it. I placed one phone call that night. Not to Emily. Not to my parents. To the head coordinator at Value Dining. I told them exactly what to do and when to do it. Then I turned off my phone, sat in the quiet of my apartment, and let myself feel every single thing I'd been holding in for weeks. The anger. The sadness. The pride. And underneath all of it, a strange kind of peace. Because for the first time, I wasn't hoping they'd notice me. I was making sure they couldn't ignore me. There's one person in my life who never made me feel small. Her name is Linda Ashworth. She was my first real boss, back when I was 23 and working as an assistant coordinator at a luxury event firm in the city. Linda ran that company like a general runs an army. Every detail mattered. Every timeline was sacred. Every client interaction was a performance of competence and grace. She taught me everything. How to read a room. How to manage vendors who didn't respect you. How to keep your composure when the entire event was falling apart behind the curtain. And most importantly, she taught me that my work had value, even when no one clapped for it. When I left her firm to start my own consultancy, Linda didn't try to stop me. She shook my hand, gave me a list of contacts, and said, "You're ready. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." We stayed in touch over the years. She became my mentor, my sounding board, and occasionally, my reality check. 2 days before Emily's wedding, I called Linda. I told her everything. The rehearsal dinner. The brunch. The unpaid expenses. The contracts in my name. The invoice sitting sealed in a manila envelope on my kitchen counter. Linda listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, "Melinda, you trained for this. Don't let them erase your work." I told her I was scared. Not of Emily. Not of the confrontation. But of what it would mean for my family. What if they never spoke to me again? Linda's voice was steady. "They're not speaking to you now. Not really. They're speaking at you. There's a difference." She asked me to send her the contracts. I did. She reviewed every document that night and called me back the next morning. "These are airtight," she said. "You're legally protected, and you're owed full payment. This isn't personal, Melinda. This is business. And you've conducted it properly." That confirmation gave me something I hadn't felt in weeks. Certainty. Meanwhile, Emily was in full performance mode. She posted a video on social media the night before the wedding, thanking herself for pulling off the impossible. She tagged the venue, the florist, the photographer. She didn't mention me. She didn't mention Valure Dining by name either. She just said, "I even handled the catering crisis on my own." I watched that video sitting on my bed with my laptop open and the invoice file glowing on the screen beside it. I closed the video. I picked up my phone. I texted the head coordinator at Valure Dining one final message. Proceed as planned. Deliver the invoice 3 days after the event, in person, during the final walkthrough meeting. Make sure Emily and her husband are both present. The reply came back in seconds. Confirmed. I put my phone down and exhaled. Tomorrow, I would attend my sister's wedding. Not as her staff. Not as her charity case. As a guest. And 3 days later, the truth would speak for itself. The wedding was beautiful. I'll give Emily that. The venue looked like something from a magazine. White roses lined the aisle. Candles floated in glass bowls on every table. The string quartet played softly as guests took their seats under a canopy of draped linen and hanging greenery. I sat in the 4th row on the family side. Not the front. Not beside my parents. 4th row, near the edge, next to a cousin I hadn't seen in 6 years. Nobody guided me to a closer seat. Nobody saved me one. The ceremony was short and elegant. Emily cried. Her husband, David, looked genuinely moved. My parents sat in the front row, beaming. My mother dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief embroidered with Emily's initials. It was a beautiful moment. And I felt it. Despite everything, I felt the beauty of it. After the ceremony, the reception began, and that's when the real show started. The food was extraordinary. Valure Dining had outdone themselves. Every course was perfectly timed, beautifully plated, and met with audible appreciation from the guests. I watched people close their eyes as they tasted the seared scallops. I saw a woman at table 9 press her hand to her chest after the first bite of the lavender creme brulee. The wine pairings were flawless. The service staff moved like dancers, silent and precise. And I knew every detail of that operation. I had built the schedule. I had chosen the wines. I had approved the final menu after 3 rounds of revisions with the head chef. I had done all of it. During the speeches, Emily stood up with a glass of champagne. She thanked her bridesmaids. She thanked her parents. She thanked David's family. She thanked the venue coordinator by name. She thanked the florist. She even thanked the DJ. She did not thank me. She looked out at the room with tears glistening in her eyes and said, "I'm so proud of what we pulled together." When our caterer canceled last minute, I thought it was over. But I made calls, I found solutions, and honestly, this turned out better than I ever imagined. The room applauded. My mother squeezed Emily's hand. My father nodded like a proud general watching his best soldier. I sat still. I didn't clap. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I just sat there and let the sound of applause wash over me like water over a stone. Smooth. Cold. Familiar. After the reception, I said goodnight to a few people, hugged my cousin, and left without fanfare. 3 days passed. I got a text from the Velier dining coordinator at 10:47 in the morning. Meeting is set for noon. Emily and David confirmed. We're ready. I replied, thank you. At noon, Emily and David arrived at Velier Dining's private office for what they thought was a casual post-wedding thank you meeting. Emily later told my mother she wanted to personally compliment the team and maybe get a discount for a future anniversary event. She walked in smiling. She walked out silent. The head coordinator, a tall woman named Renee, greeted them warmly. They sat down in a bright conference room that smelled of fresh espresso and leather chairs. Renee thanked them for choosing Velier Dining and said the team had enjoyed working on the event. Then she opened a folder. Before we wrap up, I do need to present the final invoice for services rendered, Renee said. She slid a printed document across the table. Emily picked it up casually. Then her expression changed. The total at the bottom read $89,000. The consulting firm listed at the top was Melinda Mullins Consulting. The client listed was Emily Garrett, née Mullins. Emily looked up. There must be a mistake. Renee shook her head. No mistake. Ms. Mullins was the contracting consultant on this engagement. All services, including catering, staffing, logistics coordination, and menu design, were arranged and managed through her firm. This invoice reflects the agreed-upon professional rates. Emily's face went pale. David leaned forward and scanned the document. Who authorized this? He asked. Renee opened a second folder and laid out copies of signed agreements, email chains, and text message confirmations. These were all approved by your wife via direct correspondence with Ms. Mullins over the past 5 weeks, Renee said. That's when I walked in. I had been waiting in a side office, listening. I stepped into the room quietly and stood near the door. Emily looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. What is this, Melinda? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You said I wasn't contributing, I said. So I made sure it was official. Every service at your wedding was coordinated, contracted, and billed through my business. Because that's what I do, Emily. That's my real job. She opened her mouth, then closed it. David looked between us, confused and pale. You can't be serious, Emily said. I stepped closer and placed one more document on the table. It was a printout of her social media post, the one where she said she handled the catering crisis on her own. You wanted the credit, I said. Now you get the bill. Emily stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor. This is insane. You're family. You can't charge family. You didn't treat me like family, I said. You treated me like hired help. So I'm billing accordingly. My parents found out that evening. My mother called me, crying. My father called me, vindictive. Emily called me 7 times. I answered on the 7th. She screamed. She threatened. She begged. I let her finish. Then I said, you didn't want a charity case. So I gave you a professional. I didn't waive the invoice. I want to be clear about that. I didn't back down and I didn't apologize. But I also didn't set out to destroy my sister. I offered Emily a structured payment plan. 12 monthly installments over the course of a year. Reasonable terms. Professional terms. The kind of terms I'd offer any client who needed flexibility. She didn't like it. Of course she didn't. My parents called a family meeting the following Sunday. They sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten dinner as a child, always in the same chair, always the quiet one. My father spoke first. "You need to let this go, Melinda. She's your sister." I looked at him and said, "She told a room full of people I was a charity case. She told her friends I don't have a real job. She took credit for work I did. And she never once said thank you." My mother wiped her eyes. "But family doesn't send invoices. Family doesn't humiliate each other either," I said. But here we are. Emily sat across from me, arms crossed, jaw tight. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge what she'd done. She just stared at me like I had betrayed her, as if asking to be paid for professional work was somehow worse than being publicly degraded. I stood up from that table with the same calm I'd carried through the entire ordeal. "I'm not asking for your approval," I said. "I'm not asking for your love. I'm asking for what I'm owed. And if you can't see the difference, that tells me everything." I left the house that afternoon. Emily eventually agreed to the payment plan. It took her lawyer 2 weeks to confirm the contracts were legitimate and enforceable. Linda was right. They were airtight. Over the next several months, something unexpected happened. Word spread in the event industry about what I had done. Not the family drama. The work itself. Valier Dining recommended me to 3 new clients. I landed a corporate retreat contract worth twice what Emily owed me. My consultancy grew. My name grew. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need my family to see my value for it to be real. They spent years calling me nothing. They spent holidays overlooking me, dinners dismissing me, and conversations erasing me. But in the end, they had to pay for everything I was. And that payment wasn't about money. It was about the truth. The truth that I was never the charity case. I was the one holding everything together. And now, finally, everyone knew it. If your family has ever dismissed your work or treated your success like it didn't matter, you know how painful that can be. Being underestimated doesn't just hurt. It can push you to prove yourself in ways they never expect. Have you ever had someone take credit for your effort or assume you had nothing to offer? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe if you believe your work deserves respect, no matter where it comes from. And if this story reminded you that your value isn't up for debate, click share to help this story reach others who need it. Sometimes the people who see you least are the ones who owe you the most. Your story has power. If you felt a connection to mine, please subscribe and share your journey in the comments. Every share you give this video helps empower someone else who's been overlooked. You never know who needs to hear that they're worth more than what people say. Thank you for being here and for listening.